We're now going to hear from Dr. Catherine Lynch. She's in Australia and from Australia. She's going to talk about the voice of the child as commodity in adoption and surrogacy. Dr. Lynch is a lawyer. She's vice president of Adoptee Rights Australia, Inc., and founding member of Abolish Surrogacy Australia. She's proud to be part of a global community of adoptee activists, and her lived experience informs her activist work to abolish the child commodification intrinsic to adoption and its successor, surrogacy.
I'm going to speak about how surrogacy is in a similar category to adoption in terms of the damage it causes to women and children and its violation of human rights of children as enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Adopted people around the world have testified to lifelong damage caused to them just by the mere fact of being permanently separated from their mothers at or near to their birth. They also testified to a secondary compounding trauma of being forced to live apart from all of their kin, and this legal severance is symbolised in the replacement of their birth certificates. So I'll just show you, this is my birth certificate here. And it has my name on it and the name of my mother who gave birth to me. And then I was issued an adoption order. So at this point, I have documents that reflect the truth of who I am and what was happening to me. But the very strange thing that happens in adoption is that what then happens is they go ahead and issue a second birth certificate. And this time your name is completely gone and you have a completely new name, first and last name, and a completely new mother who you didn't even know when you were born. So it's created as if you're born a second time. I mean, that's how I think about it. And it doesn't correspond in any way to the facts surrounding my birth. So in adoption, both your name and the name of your mother are secreted away in a government file. And this whole system was designed to hide the facts of what was then known as an illegitimate birth. That is, it was invented to deal with what was seen as the historical social problem of unmarried mothers and the burden and stigma of their illegitimate children. If you want to know more about the construction of the legitimacy-illegitimacy distinction and how it functioned historically to protect male property rights while facilitating male sexual entitlement, you might like to read Gail Reeke's book, Measuring Immorality, Social Inquiry and the Problem of Illegitimacy. So modern adoption is not an ancient practice, as lobbyists claim, but it was invented in the 20th century to solve this problem, the early 20th century, that had been debated in parliaments for hundreds of years. This new solution to illegitimacy was partly enabled by developments such as the mass production of baby bottles and the development of baby formula and other social developments that increased the ability, the chances of newborn babies to survive after birth without their mothers. Before these developments, it was considered that illegitimate children, so-called illegitimate children, could have a redemptive effect on their bad mothers. But afterwards, after the changes, social impacts, this notion was able to be reversed, and the mother was considered to be unfit to parent her own baby. And the baby was then rescued from her and placed in the home of married couples who were infertile or unable to conceive. So the pressure for married couples to have children at this time was likewise heightened by the rise of the nuclear family ideal. And if you want to read more about that, you can read the Anne Summers book, Damned Whores and God's Police. Finally, we know that the invention of adoption was also used as part of the creation of the stolen generations and the system of land theft, assimilation and genocide that so devastated Indigenous population of Australia and other colonised nations. So 20th century adoption was able to be produced by the patriarchy because of a particular socio-historical juncture of a number of narratives and coalescing purposes. So this new system of closed records adoption essentially reversed the common law that had always said, the English common law said you couldn't relinquish guardianship of your own children, and that was actually a crime. It was a crime of abandonment. But this new reversal became a booming demand-driven baby market in which women were, this is over the course of the 20th century, in which women were coerced, assaulted and forced to sign away their babies, and for which our Prime Minister at the time in 2013, Julia Gillard, has since offered a national apology. Similar forced adoption markets developed in Ireland, Scotland and the UK. So this is around the 50s, 60s, 70s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Canada, New Zealand as well, again, with the introduction of adoption laws and adoption acts in those countries. And some of these countries are currently conducting inquiries with a view to also offering national apologies. I think the UK, I know Scotland was really gearing up, and I think the UK has just announced there are an official inquiry to that end. If you'd like to know more about the development of the adoption market in Australia, you can read The Market in Babies, Stories of Australian Adoption by Denise Cuthbert, Marion Courtley and Shirley Swain. Why we're still using this antiquated, racist, sexist 20th century institution in the 21st century, when we're well aware of its history and we no longer remove children solely because their mothers are unmarried, is a very interesting question, because as you know, adoption has not ended, it's certainly diminished and has been rebranded by government and lobbyists. The difficulty with rebranding, it's we're no longer taking children from unfit, unmarried mothers. It's we're saving them from the endless carousel of the foster care system. So it's being used, promoted now as like a child protection solution. The difficulty with this rebranding is that adoption in no way complies with child protection mandates, because it doesn't provide any welfare checks once children arrive in private adoptive homes, and it continues the changing of birth certificates and therefore kind of the erasure of mothers and the legal severance of the child's rights to their own families. So why has it been rebranded and kept alive as a system instead of being replaced by guardianship style care and other forms of care where you can care for children in a family environment, for example, without doing all this stuff to their identity and their legal rights and stuff? The answer is a complex combination of functions which all serve capitalist patriarchy, one of which is it props up the tolerance in the community for the next level up of legal child trade, if you like, which is inter-country adoption, and which can, inter-country adoption can and has been used in trade deals with foreign countries. So you can, ask a country to open up their inter-country adopter market, or you won't, do this or that trade deal, whatever. I certainly know the US has done that. And this in turn facilitates the third tier of legalised child trade, which is this new market in surrogacy, which like trans ideology is a huge long-term money maker for many, many people, like doctors, lawyers, social workers, psychologists. It's like a whole ecosystem of money, generating money, like adoption was in the forced adoption era. This third tier of child trade differs from the other two from adoption, because in surrogacy we intentionally create children to remove them from the mother and transport them, as opposed to them already being in the world and just vulnerable for being marked out for adoption pathways. Of course, this all feeds the same ideology and purpose as gender ideology. It's apparently US-based values system which attacks biological reality, controlling and exploiting women, erasing mothers, distracting from the real solutions to the world's problems of environmental destruction, extreme inequality and poverty under runaway capitalism. It's a value system in which everything is for sale, including children. I've even got quotes from the United States that it's sort of officially they can accept the sale of children if they're not exploited in the process. This is sort of the kind of words that they use. So lobbying for the continuance of inter-country adoptions, for example, despite scandal after scandal, which has closed down program after program from Ethiopia, from India, from Guatemala, only to reopen them again when scandal dies down, has been described by one whistleblower who worked for the European Parliament investigating the Romanian system. She described the lobbying as ferocious. So lobbying that is ferocious. Why are people so ferocious about keeping these systems going? Well, nearly a century of adoption scandals that are still occurring today. I think the most recent ones that have closed down is the inter-country adoption programs to Belgium and possibly the Netherlands. So these this whole system proves that the import and export of children for family formation cannot be adequately regulated and managed. It's still not working. We've had a lot of time to perfect it. It only facilitates illegal child trafficking and exploitation. And of course, the same can only happen with surrogacy. The problem with these systems is not only the trauma caused to people by severance from their mother at or near to birth from their kin, and often language, culture and country in the case of adoption, is that the child also essentially disappears into a private home, and whether the child is abused there is of nobody's concern. And of course, abuse occurs for many adopted children, and to this day this demographic of adoptees has less than zero voice whatsoever in society. I don't think they were excluded. This demographic of adoptees was excluded from the recent Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse because they weren't in institutions despite being placed by governments. So you probably don't know about this because nobody has wanted, nobody has wanted to know except adopted people. How much of this abuse goes on in adoption, we've got no idea because it's never reported or recorded that a victim of a domestic crime is adopted until very recently. So nobody actually researches it. And the Bureau of Statistics does not track adopted people in terms of rates of homelessness, incarceration and suicide. Adoption is not evidence-based in any sense of the word. And this is another lie that the lobbyists use all the time. So when it comes to surrogacy, it's very important to understand that a newborn baby does not know it may have been created from foreign DNA. So a newborn baby only knows and loves the woman that who she or he is born from because of the pre-existing embodied relationship of pregnancy. In this respect, a baby removed for surrogacy in infancy is no different from a baby removed for adoption, and the trauma is going to be the same. The baby feels, that his or her life is endangered because on an evolutionary perspective, if the mother died off, the baby would usually follow. It will be frightened, cries, refuse food, has difficulty sleeping. The baby misses out on the body regulation with the mother's bodily systems, emotional regulation, temperature, heartbeat, and the baby calls for the mother and cries for the mother. And I just read another person online, my hospital records and someone else's hospital records recorded our behaviour after we were taken from our mothers. So some kindly nurse said, screaming all night, So we know that babies suffer greatly when the mother is removed or fails to materialise after the huge event of birth. So to finish up this talk, I just want to mention quickly the international human rights law. The Convention on the Rights of the Child was originally based on a document called the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. In this initial document, the fundamental human right not to be separated from your mother was directly stated in Principle 6. By the time we get to the Convention, the word mother is replaced by the word parents. Maybe that was to include the father, but it just goes to show the erasure of mothers began a long time ago. And now today in surrogacy, your right to not be separated from your mother, as stated directly in Principle 6 and still protected by Article 9, is a right not to be separated from anyone in the whole world, unrelated strangers even. The child's mother is anybody, any woman, and now with trans ideology, the mother can be any man in the world, anyone who merely intends to parent. Abusers, pedophiles, and even murderers do intend to parent if it gets them a victim. So this is a human right specifically designed and applied to children, which has not just been encroached upon, but has been utterly obliterated, in my opinion, or certainly in the United States, because that's where the particular law has been introduced. I think it's in New York, where the gestational mother in surrogacy isn't even included on that original birth certificate. So how do you track her, especially if you're not related by DNA? So the child, she's vanished from the child's life and knowledge. So on top of this, surrogacy violates Articles 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 21 and 24, which is about half of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And like slavery, it's fundamentally unethical, immoral, and a violation of a plethora of women and children's rights, and it's cruel. So in conclusion, the adoption boom has ended as a boom outside of America, but what ensured it still lingers on outside of America, outside the US, was the creation of a private international law, the Hague Convention on Intercountry Adoption. So this same path is now being trodden by the same people who created that convention. They're the same people calling for a convention on the regulation of surrogacy. And when I say the same people, I mean literally the same people, the same organisations such as International Social Services and all the same self-professed child rights experts, exactly the same people, the same adoption lobbyists who were described as ferocious. It appears to be an amazing amount of power in such a concentrated group of private citizens to be able to create a Hague Convention and somehow through unfathomably well-funded lobbying have it become international law. So if they succeed in creating this Hague Convention and then in lobbying governments to sign up to it, we really must resign ourselves to living in this world where the buying and selling of babies and children and their import and export around the world is legal and therefore acceptable, just as it is already to some extent via adoption pathways. So any convention to regulate surrogacy must be prevented, and all surrogacy must be outlawed, not just outlawed, but prosecuted. So that's the end of my talk.